Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 2 based on novel. So let's start. Even the beast god Di Qian wanted this strength back in the Great Star Do Forest. The Skydream Iceworm was far too valuable, and this origin power wasn't something that Di Qian could take without the Skydream Iceworm's consent. Therefore, the beast god had gathered other savage beasts to absorb the Skydream Iceworm's soul power that he had obtained after so many years. In the beginning, the Skydream Iceworm took his own origin power into Hui Yuhao's body when he had first fused with him. Hui Yuhao's cultivation had thus been able to improve continuously, and his spiritual power's exponential qualitative change all had to do with the Skydream Iceworm's origin power. Otherwise, how could his body transform so smoothly? However, the Skydream Iceworm didn't give all his origin power to Hui Yuhao, because his body's capacity was far from enough. There was another more important thing that Hui Yuhao didn't know. As long as the Skydream Iceworm maintained his origin power and kept it from dissipating, then the Skydream Iceworm could still choose another human to merge with even if Hui Yuhao passed away. In this moment, when the Skydream Iceworm decided to fuse his most valuable possession into Hui Yuhao's body, Hui Yuhao and he could no longer be separated. Either Hui Yuhao finally stepped onto the path of becoming a god, or he would live and die with him. The truth was, the Skydream Iceworm had long contemplated fusing his origin power with Hui Yuhao when Hui Yuhao had interacted with the god realm a long time ago. How much Hui Yuhao's body could bear was sufficient. However, the Ice Empress had stopped him. The Skydream Iceworm should wait until a crucial moment and give his origin power to he when Hui Yuhao was breaking through. That would be much more effective. Wasn't this the important opportunity they were waiting for? The Skydream Iceworm didn't expect this moment to arrive so quickly. Soul beasts cultivated differently from humans. Therefore, they couldn't guide Hui Yuhao in this respect. However, both the Skydream Iceworm and the Ice Empress were some of the strongest people in the world, and they all possessed incredibly strong abilities within their domains. Of course, they could see that this moment was an incredible opportunity for improvement to Hui Yuhao. An opportunity like that only came once in a blue moon, at least, such opportunities were considerably rare. It would be a pity to miss it. The Skydream Iceworm's origin power was incredibly strong because his was a pure and perfect fusion between spiritual power and soul power. The Skydream Iceworm had completely discarded his element of ice when he was helping Hui Yuhao construct his second martial soul. The Skydream Iceworm only had pure soul power and spiritual power at this moment. This was the reason why he was most suitable for helping Hui Yuhao form his first soul core. Elder Xian's eyes were wide with astonishment. Hui Yuhao was already almost overcome with weakness, but the enormous iceworm's appearance behind his back enabled his spirit to swiftly recover, while his soul power was being unleashed at an exponentially quicker rate, and continuously as well. It didn't take long before the volume of the solid-state soul power he had created was comparable to that of a soul dolor. That was just unbelievable. It was the first time that Elder Xian had seen such a thing. Even though a powerful martial soul can help soul masters store a certain amount of soul power, Hui Yuhao is storing far more than he should be able to. Furthermore, his two martial souls are the Spirit Eyes and the Ice Empress Jade Scorpion. What is with this huge worm? Does this mean that spirits can help soul masters store even more soul power? Elder Xian shook his head exasperatedly. Prodigies and geniuses cultivate in a different fashion from what is the norm after all. I'll just wait and see to what stage he can reach. The cracks around the funnel-shaped soul power began to turn gold, while the black hues that belonged to spatial cracks began to appear within the golden colors. Hui Yuhao realized to his surprise that when his spiritual power reached a certain level inside the solid-state soul power, it was just as the fusion of soul power and spiritual power was like inside his own body. The state of his soul power was very similar to when he was unleashing his three ultimate Haodong skills, while the only difference was that his soul power was now solid instead of liquid. It seems like solid-state soul power is still a reflection of my own ability after all. However, Hui Yuhao realized some even stranger things right at this moment. The solid soul power was still absorbing his soul power and spiritual power, while Hui Yuhao could still hang on with the Skydream Iceworm replenishing him. This solid soul power was starting to absorb more than just those two things. It was actually gradually absorbing the spatial power contained within the cracks in space. Is this where the secrets of creating the combination lie? Hui Yuhao widened his eyes, and was working hard to control everything while observing closely at the same time. Yes, it's like that. The solid soul power was clearly swallowing the spatial power contained within the cracks in space. It was very strange. The cracks in space became increasingly larger as their spatial power was absorbed, while even more spatial power filled them. Furthermore, Hui Yuhao's spiritual power was being expended at an exponentially faster rate, while the wild and violent spatial power was tearing at his spiritual power. Hui Yuhao wouldn't have been able to hang on if not for his Eye of Destiny. Time continued to pass. The Sky Dream iceworm that was almost material behind his back also became increasingly illusory. The iceworm's origin power had already integrated into the solid soul power through Hui Yuhao's body. Even if his experiment ultimately ended in failure, the origin energy of heaven and earth would be very beneficial for him, especially with respect to his fusion of soul power and spiritual power. The Sky Dream iceworm would truly become his spirit after everything ended, and they would be inseparable, just like the Snow Empress. The Sky Dream iceworm's origin power that was coming from behind him became increasingly weak. Hui Yuhao could feel his body descending into weakness once more, and he gritted his teeth as he tried his best to hang on. Even though he didn't know what kind of price the Sky Dream iceworm was paying, Hui Yuhao could still feel his weakness. Brother Sky Dream has given so much to help me, I have to hold on, no matter what. He gritted his teeth and continued releasing more spiritual power. There was nothing he could do about his soul power, so he could only keep working through spiritual power. The spiritual power in his spiritual sea flowed as if it were limitless, and even more strangely, the aura of destiny within his Eye of Destiny seemed to become stronger. A faint shadow of the three-eyed golden lion actually surfaced behind his back and enveloped his entire being in a layer of rose-gold colors. Hui Yuhao was giving his all in this moment. If he failed at compressing his soul core, he would be severely injured, and this could possibly end in worse injuries than when all his passageways were shattered. In the end, he even used all of his own origin power that he could control. The cracks in space became increasingly strong. The contortions and ripples in space, along with that strange sensation, were all deeply imprinted into Hui Yuhao's mind. It wasn't easy to sense spatial undulations from day to day. One could create those cracks in space with forceful attacks, but those cracks would only appear for an instant before disappearing again, so sensing and studying them would be impossible. However, those spatial undulations were appearing around his compressed solid-state soul power continuously and finely. They were closely related to his soul power and spiritual power, so studying and sensing them became very easy. Beads of sweat began to appear on Elder Xian's forehead because he was nervous. Elder Xian could tell that Hui Yuhao was continuously releasing soul power and spiritual power, and every possible strength in his body was reaching their respective limits. Elder Xian also understood that he would inflict heavy damage to Hui Yuhao if he interrupted him at such a moment. But fusing with the mixture wasn't as simple as creating it. The individual's body had to be able to bear the mixture. Hui Yuhao had only recently become a soul sage, and he had just sustained severe injuries. Could he really absorb the soul core into his body? The cracks in space on the surface of the solid soul power became closely woven like a web. Black cracks appeared continuously, and the solid-state soul power's absorption and rotation speed were nearing their absolute limits. All space was being completely distorted around it, and all Hui Yuhao could see was a ball of gold, rose gold and black merged together into a strange sphere, which contained frightening soul power. Come! Collapse! Hui Yuhao roared in his heart, and he transformed the meager remainder of his spiritual power into spiritual shock before he fused that entirely into the solid-state soul power. It was at this time that the Sky Dream iceworm behind him gave every last bit of his origin power. The Sky Dream iceworm transformed into a beam of flowing light, reintegrated into his body, and vanished. Success would be determined in this exact moment. The solid-state soul power quivered faintly. Hui Yuhao had a strange feeling in this moment that the solid-state soul power, which was rotating ever so quickly, had suddenly stopped. It went from extreme motion to extreme motionlessness. This sudden sensation made him depressed. However, Hu felt as if everything had grown blurry around him in the next moment, as if he were now within the starry skies, and only that gentle spatial power was around him. Space suddenly collapsed in that instant, as if everything was collapsing together with his body as the epicenter, while terrifying spatial power immediately tore his body to pieces. However, his body reformed itself after it was torn to pieces, and his consciousness returned. Hu saw to his surprise that the solid-state soul power had collapsed into a black hole. Hu only took one look before he felt as if his soul were about to be sucked in. There was endless darkness inside the black hole, and there were boundless unknowns, but he couldn't feel the kind of soul power contained within it at all. However, he could clearly feel a connection that resembled a bridge between the black hole and himself. There were fine golden waves rippling continuously around the black hole. These golden waves gradually froze and took shape, and Hu discovered to his surprise that they actually took a strange eye-like shape, while the black hole in the middle was the pupil. Is this my soul core? Elder Xian was watching him from the beginning to the end. In this moment, he shared the same shock and astonishment. Hu had formed his own soul core as a soul sage. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing, let alone seen one. He had witnessed a miracle happen with own eyes, and was filled with pleasant surprise. Furthermore, he obtained some inspirations from Hu when he was compressing his mixture. Hu's compression method was different from typical soul masters. He was clearly using a lot more spiritual power than soul power, and when his element finally fused with his soul core, his martial soul seemed to become his main guide. This order looked very important. In the instant when the soul core collapsed inward, its soul power undulations were unnaturally stable, and it didn't need any external strength to control it. The soul core had been formed in this moment, and it no longer absorbed Hu's soul power. It was only gently absorbing the origin energy of heaven and earth in the air. However, the deep darkness within it and the aura of the mixture itself clearly gave Elder Xian a feeling that this core wasn't that much different from that of a transcendent dolor. The only difference was that it was a little smaller. Hu, try to absorb it. However, you have to be very careful. If you feel like your body can't take it anymore, release it immediately. You'll have to risk regressing your cultivation instead of forcing yourself. Otherwise, this soul core can obliterate you with its power. You should feel whether your body can take its power once it enters you. Remember, don't force yourself. If you feel even a little bit like you're forcing yourself, don't try fusing with the soul core. Yes, Hu steeled his nerves. He was still very much overcome by surprise, because he realized that soul power was coming back into his body when it was originally empty of it. Furthermore, his soul power was recovering faster than before, and his spiritual power was recovering at a similar speed. Everything seemed connected to his soul core. Hu wasn't overly hasty to absorb the soul core. Instead, he crossed his legs and sat down in front of it. He channeled his soul power quietly as he replenished it while he observed any changes that were happening in the mixture. Elder Xian was momentarily stunned before he said hurriedly, "Wait for a moment before you absorb it. Your soul core seems different from most. It's far too stable, and it doesn't seem like it will lose control or become unstable even without your control. If that's the case, you can try recovering all your soul power and spiritual power before attempting to absorb it. Don't worry, I will observe from the side, and will immediately warn you if something is wrong with it." Hu nodded toward Elder Xian. His own feelings were identical to those of Elder Xian, except this was his first time forming a soul core, so he didn't know what it was supposed to be like. Elder Xian drew a cold breath. This was the first time he had seen such a stable soul core that was almost near perfection. Did this mean that soul masters could create a soul core such as this before becoming a transcendent dolor, as long as their spiritual power far exceeded their soul power? Typically, title dolor would have to immediately absorb their soul cores after completing them when they were breaking through to become a transcendent dolor. Otherwise, if their soul cores became unstable, everything that they had worked for could possibly be for nothing, while the soul core could possibly hurt the title dolor's own body. Hu's soul core was different from the rest. It was so stable that it was almost like a normal object. Quite a long time had passed since the soul core was formed. However, it was still extremely stable, and the way it absorbed the origin energy of heaven and earth wasn't as forceful and ferocious as that of a transcendent Doluor soul core. But this kind of stability was even more precious and hard to come by. It seems like Hui Yuhao might have a chance to fuse with his soul core successfully. That was just unimaginable. Elder Xian was witnessing yet another miracle from Hui Yuhao. Time continued to pass. Hui Yuhao's soul power and spiritual power were recovering at an astonishing speed, and it took him less than an hour before he reopened his eyes, back to his peak condition. Can I begin, Elder Xian? Hui Yuhao turned toward Elder Xian. Elder Xian was astonished. Your soul power and spiritual power have recovered? Hui Yuhao nodded. Elder Xian didn't ask any further. Instead, he tilted his head and said, yes, then you may begin. Remember what I've said before, it would be better for you to not complete the fusion than take any risks. Yes. Hui Yuhao acknowledged and turned his gaze toward his soul core. Hui Yuhao could feel a boundless and terrifying existence inside his soul core that could consume everything, just like when he was observing it before. When he stared at it, he immediately felt an incredibly strong attractive force that seemed like it wanted to pull his spirit into it. Hui Yuhao closed his eyes and opened his Eye of Destiny. Rose gold patterns immediately shone from his Eye of Destiny. Hui Yuhao's Eye of Destiny gazed at the black hole, and he realized to his surprise that he had a feeling as if his Eye of Destiny was staring at itself, as if the black hole was what it was like after his Eye of Destiny was magnified. Everything was just so unimaginable. Hui Yuhao didn't have to control it. His Eye of Destiny naturally produced a strange gravitational force that pulled the black hole towards him. The faint golden light around the black hole also began to shrink, and even its original body was contracting. By the time the black hole was several meters in front of Hui Yuhao, it had shrunk to the same size as his Eye of Destiny. Golden light patterns shone from both ends, and it fit itself against his Eye of Destiny as if it was imprinting onto it. Elder Xian's eyes widened. He understood what Hui Yuhao wanted to do. He wasn't just about to fuse with his soul core. The location that he chose wasn't his Dantian, which was a location that was easier for the soul master to absorb his soul core. Instead, he chose the center of his eyebrows, which was the hardest place to accomplish fusion. Typically, even transcendent Doluor breaking through to become an ultimate Doluor would choose the chest instead of between the eyebrows when forming their second soul core. The reason was because the space between the eyebrows was too close to the brain, and a single mistake could threaten their life. However, Hui Yuhao's situation was evidently different from everyone else. Spiritual power was his fate, and in the process of forming his soul core, his spiritual power allowed his soul core to become very stable. His martial soul was spirit eyes, while the space between his eyebrows was one of 3 locations that could absorb soul cores, and it was so close to his martial soul's location at the same time. Therefore, Hui Yuhao's idea wasn't impossible. He would leave his Dantian empty so that he could store another soul core there when he was breaking through to become a titled Doluor. In that case, he could possibly have 2 soul cores when becoming a titled Doluor. Elder Xian thought about his twin martial souls, and felt that this path that Hui Yuhao had chosen was most suitable for him. He exhaled deeply as he remained stunned. For the first time, Elder Xian felt that he could no longer teach this little fellow in front of him. Golden light pressed together as his soul core slid in. Hui Yuhao's body quivered vigorously, and 2 beams of rose gold light blasted from his eyes as if they were 2 materialized swords. Elder Xian wasn't far from him, and he took a step back subconsciously. His Eye of Destiny shone with light from the center of his eyebrows, and its sun patterns seemed like they were being reinvigorated. They layered together as they glowed and stretched outward from his forehead to the space between his eyebrows. The sun patterns looked like they were growing, and they quickly stretched over his entire forehead. Hui Yuhao's hair drifted into the air and danced in midair, even though there was no wind. Hui Yuhao felt as if a terrifying and indescribable power had been injected into his spiritual sea. This power was like a sharp cone that was splitting his head apart, as if it were about to suck his spiritual sea dry, as if it were really about to open up another eye on his head. That agonizing feeling made him feel a clear sensation of being shattered. Hui Yuhao's path could be said to have been forged through pain and agony ever since the day he had fused with the Sky Dream Iceworm and the Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion. He possessed many abilities that soul masters couldn't even begin to imagine. However, he had to sustain countless instances of unimaginable pain to gain such abilities. His strength increased after every episode of agony. At the same time, every instant strengthened his spiritual resolve and endurance. His tolerance toward pain was not something that most normal people could match. Towards the end, Donga and Chioa left him one after another, and he almost broke down because he had suffered too much pain in his heart. He had grown after that. He grew from a young boy to become a young adult, and he was a true warrior. In this moment, Hui Yuhao's body was still trembling intensely as he was struck by this agonizing pain. His lower body was still stable, and his hands were clenched tightly into fists. However, he was subconsciously channeling his mysterious heaven technique with his full strength. Immense spiritual power swirled within his spiritual sea according to his whim to resist that intense pain. For large spirits hovered above his spiritual sea. They knew that everything that was happening was very important to Hui Yuhao. With the exclusion of the Sky Dream Ice Worm, who had sacrificed his origin power, the other three spirits were all using their consciousnesses to protect his spiritual sea so that it wouldn't shatter. Golden sun patterns quickly stretched from his forehead over his face, before they went down his neck, his collarbone, his chest, his arms, and his abdomen. Several short minutes passed as Hui Yuhao's entire body was covered with sun patterns. That wasn't all. An enormous vertical eye slowly opened behind his back, and this eye was rose gold as well. It radiated sun patterns, and that frightening suction force appeared once more. It was 2 times stronger than before, and the origin energy of heaven and earth in the air swiftly and immediately gathered toward Hui Yuhao. Hui Yuhao's clothes almost instantly disintegrated into dust, revealing his body, which was a perfect fusion between energy and beauty. Sun patterns covered his tall and large frame, giving others a feeling of simple mystery. The vertical eye behind him gradually became a black hole as it consumed everything in the air. Even Elder Xian began to feel that his soul power and spiritual power wanted to leave his body, and he had to release even more soul power to control them. Time continued to pass. Hui Yuhao's trembling slowly stabilized, and the rose gold colors in his eyes slowly dimmed as he gradually shut his eyes. However, the eye of destiny on his forehead became increasingly bright. The vertical eye contained the endless stars of the night sky, deep whirlpools, and uncountable worlds of radiant colors, as if the black hole contained everything in the world and beyond. Has he succeeded? Elder Xian was also a little nervous. He was still confident of pulling out the soul core in the first few seconds when Hui Yuhao was fusing with it, but even Elder Xian couldn't do anything in this moment. Hui Yuhao's fusion with his soul core was far too deep, and Elder Xian couldn't do anything to separate them. Otherwise, Hui Yuhao's own life would be at risk. Truly high risk but high reward. Elder Xian heaved a sigh inside. Far inside the great Star Doe forest, not even the beast god would have expected that his descent into Hui Yuhao's body had advanced his understanding of strength at that level, and Hui Yuhao was even bravely experimenting with it. The sun patterns began to ebb like tidewater. They receded as quickly as they had appeared, and even Hui Yuhao's skin faded away with the sun patterns as he shone with faint rose gold colors. However, it seemed like his entire person was sublimating into itself. Hui Yuhao finally stopped trembling. The eye of destiny on his forehead gradually withdrew, and when its glow was extinguished in the end, all that was left was a black whirlpool that swirled continuously. There were fine and delicate rose gold light patterns around the whirlpool. Every single line flashed and changed shape continuously, as if they were all cracks in space. The black whirlpool was clearly on Hui Yuhao's forehead, but one would feel that it in fact belonged to another world upon closer inspection. That mystical feeling transfixed Elder Xian's gaze. Hui Yuhao's fusion today had given him inspiration, a lot of inspiration at that. The black whirlpool was becoming smaller as it rotated until it finally disappeared in the end, and Hui Yuhao's forehead became clean once more. What was even stranger was that Hui Yuhao's aura vanished entirely along with the black whirlpool. He was sitting there like a rock, but also like clear spring. There wasn't a single trace of his own aura, as if his entire being had become illusory, as if Hui Yuhao had disappeared along with that black whirlpool into another world. Elder Xian took a deep breath. He knew that this little fellow had created something entirely new once more. According to his knowledge, Nobody amongst human title Dolor had ever successfully created a soul core above his dantian. There were 3 areas: the space between the eyebrows, the chest, and the abdomen. These locations were extremely important for a soul master toward his later years, and a soul master's soul power could only transform qualitatively by forming a soul core. This was at the core of being a title Dolor. Soul beasts had a relatively easier time forming soul cores than soul masters. In the end, soul beasts' physiques were much stronger than those of humans. Diqian's soul power had been completely converted into soul cores, and there was nobody else like him in the world. Therefore, he was the most powerful individual amongst all the ultimate Dolor. In this moment, Hui Yuhao managed to create his first soul core as a 7-ringed soul sage. There was no question that his cultivation would improve at a rate far exceeding typical individuals. This was an unimaginable accomplishment. The only thing Elder Xian was worried about was whether Hui Yuhao could form his second soul core to become a title Dolor after he reached rank 89. Elder Xian had been working towards creating his second soul core over all these years, but he was still one step away, even after all this time. It wasn't hard to imagine how difficult creating 2 soul cores was. However, Hui Yuhao had already chosen this path, and he could no longer regret his choice. Hui Yuhao seemed to enter a state of deep meditation as he sat there with his legs crossed. He didn't wake up, and his body was still filled with a feeling of illusion. Only a powerful individual like Elder Xian could feel the spatial power permeating around them. Having a soul core meant that one's martial soul could already absorb strength from the space all around them. The soul core wasn't just absorbing the origin energy of heaven and earth, the power of space was unlimited. This was the reason why the death god Dolor was so astonished when she discovered that the beast god had mastered spatial power. They were all ultimate Dolor. If Yi Shishui and the Darkness Holy Dragon were at the same standard, then Diqian was at a standard several levels higher than them. The 2 of them had to rely on external objects to close this gap. Hui Yuhao could no longer feel that intense pain anymore, and in his daze, he felt as if he were entering another world. He was hovering in the darkness within this world, and there was no end to it, all was endless stars and night. He was trying very hard to control himself, but nothing responded to his attempts at all. He could only close the distance between his senses and everything around him when he fully concentrated on the stars above, and only then could he see this starry world. Space and light, this was everything he was feeling in this moment, and he seemed to feel as if everything that he was being purified. Everything around him was just so surreal. However, all this surrealness seemed to contain the profundities of heaven and earth. This feeling was both magical and painful. Hui Yuhao found himself immersed in those sensations. Ah? Yuhao is meditating at your place. Bei Bei stared at Elder Xian, who had personally arrived at the Tang sect. Bei Bei found that hard to believe, and he asked nervously, "Is he all right?" Elder Xian shook his head as he smiled and said, "Don't worry, he'll be fine. This is quite a big opportunity for him. You guys have to work hard, otherwise, Hui Yuhao will leave everyone in the dust in the not-too-distant future." Bei Bei forced a laugh and nodded as he said, "That fellow is truly a prodigy." Elder Xian said, "Don't make it sound like that. He has gone through much more pain and suffering, and he has put in a lot more effort than you guys have. Talent is one thing, and effort is another. You have too many things to deal with in the Tang sect. You should quickly share your burden with others so that you don't overlook your cultivation. You must understand that you have completely inherited Elder Mu's blood, and your future is boundless, so cultivation is the most important thing. At least, before soul tools can become stronger than an ultimate Dolor, we have to focus on our cultivation. That's the core of being a soul master." "Yes," Bei Bei said solemnly. Elder Xian then asked about the Tang sect's progress before he left. Bei Bei escorted Elder Xian, and then returned exasperatedly to where he dealt with the Tang sect's administrative items. He muttered under his breath, "I was hoping he could help share my burden. Looks like he's run away once again. Hopefully he can awaken from his meditation as soon as possible." However, Bei Bei didn't expect Hui Yuhao to meditate for a much longer time than he thought he would. A month passed in the blink of an eye. There was still no news from Hui Yuhao, and Bei Bei, Shu Sancha, and the others personally went to the Sea God's pavilion to visit him. They made sure that he was still meditating before they returned, assured. The others from the Tang sect didn't have such an easy time going into the sea god's pavilion. However, there was one person who would discreetly visit the sea god's pavilion, and Elder Xian didn't stop her. Tang Wutong stood silently inside the room. She was staring at Hui Yuhao, who was sitting there with his legs crossed and silent like a child. Her eyes were very gentle. She seemed to feel that mystical strength from Hui Yuhao's body, and this strength was faintly affecting her own soul power undulations. This guy is sublimating. That was Tang Wutong's judgment. Tang Wutong had gone to the Tang sect after Hui Yuhao began to meditate for a week. She was there with a task from Elder Xian, and she was responsible for monitoring the Tang sect soul tool production. She unintentionally discovered that Hui Yuhao was meditating inside the sea god's pavilion, and she went to find Elder Xian to ask if she could see him. Elder Xian didn't stop her, and he saw her figure very often ever since then. Tang Wutong didn't know what she felt towards Hui Yuhao. She had thought that he was a lecher when they first met, and then believed him to be brave and clever when they were at the Star Luo Empire's western front lines, and then she believed him to be affectionate and loyal when he saved her life against the death god. Even his story with Wang Dong made her feelings toward him transform continuously. Hui Yuhao had been sitting there peacefully over the past month, and Tang Wutong had already gotten used to watching his calm silence. Every time she returned after visiting him, she would become exceptionally concentrated when she meditated herself, and her cultivation became more effective than usual. She had gradually formed this habit. She was just standing there quietly, and an hour went by. I think it's time to leave. Tang Wutong suddenly realized that she didn't want to leave him behind. But she had to go back in the end. Over this period of time, after she experienced the battle at the Mingdo mountain range, much of her potential had been unleashed, and she was improving very quickly. I should go back. I don't know when he will wake up, or whether we will come together again in the future. Perhaps we will not. I pray that he finds Donga as soon as possible. Those thoughts passed through her head, but she suddenly felt a sour tinge in her thoughts. What is happening? Just as she was feeling a little dazed, a strange sensation suddenly appeared on her body. She realized to her surprise that her soul power was starting to circulate even though she didn't do it deliberately, as a layer of faint purplish gold light shone from her body. The soul power undulations weren't powerful, but they were definitely there. Tang Wutong suddenly felt everything light up in front of her in this moment. When she fixed her eyes once more, she witnessed Hui Yuhao's glowing eyes. What kind of eyes are those? They seem to contain the endless starry skies, and are so deep that the end cannot be seen. In that instant, Tang Wutong felt like her eyes were transfixed. Hui Yuhao's eyes weren't shining with any kind of light. However, the space between him and Tang Wutong still became very bright. This feeling was impossible to describe with words, as if there were an unknown source of light present at that location. Tang Wutong stared at his deep eyes that were like whirlpools, and she felt as if her brain had gone completely blank. The feeling of losing control over her soul power became increasingly evident, but everything seemed to calm down once more in the next moment. Waves of dragon roars resonated through her mind, and they were chiming with joy. Donga, Hui Yuhao stared blankly at Tang Wutong, who wasn't far from him, and was just standing there, staring at him in a daze. Hui Yuhao began to levitate from the ground just like that. The air on the sea god's island was very clean, so he was sparkling clean even though he had been meditating there for a month. Tang Wutong was wearing a blue gown today, and this was once Wang Donga's favorite color. Only thoughts of Donga resided in Hui Yuhao's mind in his moment. Hui Yuhao had been in deep meditation for over a month. He had gone back and forth through the brightness within those endless starry skies, but everything seemed to vanish the moment he saw Tang Wutong. In this exact moment, she was the only thing in his eyes, his alluring, familiar, and elegant goddess. The space around him seemed to change, and neither Hui Yuhao nor Tang Wutong knew how they closed the distance between one another. Hui Yuhao gently stretched out his arms and embraced her. He felt as if he had wrapped his arms around the entire world in that moment, as if he were the dictator of those boundless starry skies. Everything is just wonderful, just so wonderful. Tang Wutong was no longer staring at those bottomless eyes, while her own became agile and sensitive once more as she emerged from her dazed state. But she realized that she had melted into a warm and wide embrace. Donga, Donga, there was a gentle call in her ears, and that voice sounded like a dream. That voice sounded as if it were calling for a spirit from ancient years, and that voice, which was so gentle and full of emotion, made Tang Wutong a little intoxicated. She realized that she could no longer control herself, except it wasn't her soul power this time. She had lost control over her body. She raised her hand subconsciously. She was hesitant and jerky, but her hands kept moving forward, and she wrapped them around Hui Yuhao's broad waist. She closed her eyes in that moment, and all she felt was warmth, security, comfort, and intoxication. They were hugging each other so tightly in that moment, and the entire room seemed to glow. Hui Yuhao muttered under his breath, "Even though we are just in a dream, I am willing to remain in this dream forever. Please allow me to sleep for eternity if this a dream. Donga, I miss you so much. Did you know? I am but left with an empty vessel in the days that you've left my side. You've returned, and my spirit has returned. I love you, Donga. I am willing to love you with my everything to the end of eternity, and I am willing to burn my own life and soul so that we can be together. That is all I want. If this is a dream, let me remain in deep slumber." Tang Wutong was momentarily stunned, and her sensations of indulgence and immersion receded instinctively. He's calling her. Wang Donga. I am just his dream. I am just a shadow of her. A taste of bitterness appeared at the corner of her lips. She didn't want to leave this warm embrace, but she had no choice but to gently put down her hands that were tightly wrapped around him, no matter how much yearning she had to be in his arms. "I'm sorry, I am Wutong." A gentle voice rang out beside Hui Yuhao's ears. This was like a thunderclap for him, and he subconsciously released his arms and floated backward like a lightning bolt. Tang Wutong no longer had anything to lean on as he shifted, and her elegant frame stumbled forward for a moment before she stabilized herself. Hui Yuhao's eyes were filled with hope and dreams before this, but they gradually dimmed as he stared at Tang Wutong in front of him. Tang Wutong turned her eyes aside. She seemed to lose her own spirit as he left her arms, and she appeared a little dazed. That empty feeling gave her unimaginable agony deep within her heart, and she felt like she wanted to die. Hui Yuhao's face was a little pale as he stared at Tang Wutong. "Sorry," he said with difficulty. "I'm the one who should be sorry. I startled you and woke you up from your dream. But I am not her, and I am sorry for making your sweet dream become a nightmare." Tang Wutong nodded gently in his direction before she swiftly turned around and glided away. She didn't give him another look from the beginning to the end. She didn't dare to look at him. She was afraid that his eyes would hook her spirit once more if that happened. Yes, she didn't dare. Hui Yuhao was just standing there as he watched her leave with listless eyes. There was an almost hysterical voice in his heart that was calling for him to hold on to her, but he remained standing there in the end, motionless. She's not her. She is Tang Wutong, and not my Donga. But why did our embrace feel so familiar? If she didn't say it, perhaps I would really have treated her as Donga. Where are you, Donga? Tears flowed down his cheeks like a waterfall. He clutched his fists tightly as he suddenly turned and stared outside the window. Hui Yuhao could see Tang Wutong, who was dashing away crazily. He could see the radiating purplish-green hues from her body, and an unknown force pulled at his body and his heart. He watched her until she disappeared beyond the horizon, and that figure that was identical to that of Donga's vanished just like that. Donga, Donga. In the Tang sect. Bam! Nan Chuchio began to pout as she kicked away all the stones that were blocking her way. She had been very depressed over the past month. We had an agreement. We were supposed to return to my sect and explore the hidden area. But he didn't even say anything to me before he went into his closed-door cultivation. And he picked the right time for that as well. Is he deliberately trying to avoid me? We have already agreed on being brothers, so why is he dodging me? What an asshole. Everyone in the Tang sect had been very busy over the past month. They were either busy with administrative matters or cultivation. Nan Chiu was the same. She wasn't assigned much work because she had a very irritable and impatient personality. She was tasked to focus more on cultivation. However, cultivating for too long also made her feel frustrated and dull. She was really starting to find this loneliness unbearable. She was still walking forward as a figure blocked her path. "Hey, get out of my way." Nan Chiu was already in a bad mood, and her hot temper immediately erupted. She didn't even lift her head as she exploded. "You won't be able to marry in the future if you keep doing this." The person blocking her didn't move away, but instead quipped back at her. "What the fuck does that have to do with you?" Nan Chiu was furious. She raised her head and looked at the person blocking her way, and her eyes widened as her jaw dropped. Hui Yuhao stared at her with a faint smile on his face, but he sounded like he was chiding as he said, "Don't curse, you're a girl." Nan Chiu's sizzling fury from before was immediately extinguished. She was just now clearly full of complaints about this guy in front of her, but she now found herself unable to vent her anger when he was standing in front of her. Her voice was a lot lower than before. "It's true anyway. Why do you care whether I can marry? HMPH, you still know how to come back." "I'm sorry, Chiu," Hui Yuhao said apologetically. "I didn't know this delay would be so long." "I'm sorry." Nan Chiu's mood was instantly lifted when she heard Hui Yuhao apologize. She looked up at him and said, "Are you still going? I've been waiting for you for more than a month." Hui Yuhao answered, "Yes, of course we're going. We can leave at any time. I await your instruction." He even bowed at Nan Chiu as he spoke. Nan Chiu was elated. She placed her hands behind her back and nodded proudly as he said, "Yes, that's much better. I will forgive you temporarily because of your good attitude, and I will think about how to deal with you according to how you behave later on." "All right," Hui Yuhao stood up straight as he smiled and said, "Let's go back to the Tang sect. I will report to eldest senior brother, and then I can leave with you." "Yes." Nan Chiu acknowledged as she turned around and pranced back toward the Tang sect. However, she didn't notice the faint dash of loneliness deep within Hui Yuhao's smiling eyes. Hui Yuhao went to find Bei Bei immediately after returning to the Tang sect. Bei Bei appeared much better than he had 1 month ago. Xu Sancha and the others had helped share much of his burdens after they returned, and he finally had time to continue cultivating. "You're finally awake, little junior brother. How was it? How much have you gained?" Bei Bei spoke with pleasant surprise. Hui Yuhao nodded and answered, "I have gained much. However, I can't duplicate it for everyone." Bei Bei shook his head with a smile on his face. "That's nothing to worry about. Everyone has his or her own path. You have yours, and we have ours. Everyone's path is different, but we will all reach the same destination in the end, as long as we work hard and find the right direction, and if we don't take any shortcuts." Nan Chiu giggled from a side. "Eldest senior brother, your words are starting to sound more and more philosophical. You live up to your name as the Tang sect's eldest senior brother." Bei Bei chuckled and said, "Chiu, you taking Hui Yuhao back to your sect? We have delayed this matter for quite some time, and I am sorry for that. Do help me apologize to your sect leader." Part 1 end here.